We are going to get a little nerdy today about the microbiome. I recently went on a little bit of a hunt to look for some recent research about the microbiome, and I found 8 very interesting studies that might surprise you. And one thing I uncovered was a big fat lie from the clinical research and pharma, go figure. So we're going to talk about all of that today on the podcast. Welcome to the Clinical Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm Ronda, your no fluff, tell it like it is business bestie for wellness practitioners just like you who want to build a practice you love and make a bigger impact and a little money while you're at it. So if you're ready to ditch the overwhelm, attract your dream, ideal patients, and finally run your practice with complete confidence, you're in the right place. Each week, we're tackling things from programs to patient retention to marketing strategies that actually work, sprinkled, of course, with a little sass, a lot of heart, and the step-by-step strategies that will help you get there. So grab your cup of coffee, your notebook, or whatever keeps you going, and let's build a practice you love and a life you love together. Today, we're going to talk a little clinical nerdiness for those of you that love the research and love learning all of the new things. I found some little rabbit hole I went down as it has to do with the microbiome, and I was shocked. I found something. I'm going to kind of save it for last to give it a little cliffhanger action. But I read a study out of Ohio. I about lost my teeth. I couldn't believe what I was reading. It made me so cranky. But there's some stuff in here that I found, and this is all recent research at the time of this recording within, 6 to 12 months. So it's funny how, we know things that they don't know, and we figured it out, and they're just kind of coming around to it. But that's all right. We give them grace for that. So we're going to look at what they're finding that we already know and a few new and cool kind of things. So I'll share all of that with you. So this episode is going to have a lot of information. All of the resources will be linked in the show notes. You can go to rondanelson.com. And if you want to, you can check and look for this episode. It's season 2, so S2, and then the episode number is episode number 20. So you could find that, episode number 20, season 2, episode 20. So it's S2 E20, or you can just search for microbiome and it'll come up. So the first study that I came across was one on adolescents and predictors of their microbiome. And I thought this was, really interesting. It was published in Genome Medicine. And it turns out that a teenager's microbiome is pretty predictive, which is very interesting. One part of the study indicated that definitely the microbiome was shaped by mode of delivery, so C-section or vaginal birth, of course, but they did also find that screen time was a factor. That was kind of fascinating. Not surprising, I don't think, but fascinating nonetheless. But they looked at the fact that the microbiome was impacted by antibiotic use, of course, and then mode of delivery. Certainly, there was some attribution to diet, lifestyle. They also had some attribution to socioeconomic status. In other words, how financially able were these families to get, fast food, processed food, higher end foods. And they found a correlation that was fascinating about the more economically stable the family was, the less diverse the microbiome. So that was kind of interesting. The GI issues that we see in teens, most likely the research shows that they start in childhood. They found that Firmicutes was the most common bacteria, which is an abundant bacteria in the gut, and that's not surprising. But they did break it down into 4 categories, which I also thought that was interesting. And those 4 categories were early life factors. So that would have been, mode of delivery, whether they were breast or bottle fed, race, ethnicity. They also included gestational exposure to tobacco smoke. That was a factor they included. So first category, early life factors. The second category was measures of sexual maturation. Now, this was one that I really found interesting because they looked especially at pubescent and prepubescent boys and girls and how their hormones were flushing out. So in other words, a girl who maybe was moving a little bit had higher estradiol, her gut microbiome looked different than the prepubescent girl who didn't yet have those higher levels of estradiol, and it was the same in young men. They did find a greater diversity in the females than they did males, as it had to do with that. Number 3 was non-dietary concurrent factors. So they looked at like BMI and their household income, consistency of bowel movements, antibiotic use, etc. And then the last one was diet. I think diet should have been the first on the list, but they didn't put it in that order. They did find that consumption of milk, human milk, in other words, breastfed babies over 6 months, were associated with very unique differences in the microbiome. So not surprising there. But they did look at all kinds of factors. It was really a very interesting study to read. But they found that the differences in the microbial diversity related to sexual maturation and hormone concentrations was significant, as I mentioned. So I really found that very, very interesting. Again, not surprising, but very interesting. So here's what I would say. I like to kind of give you something real practical after this. So you want to, for sure, promote, food diversity, make sure they're getting lots of vegetables, lots of those good fiber and phytochemicals, that kind of thing. But we want to make sure that we think about, talking to them about screen time. Now, the teenage boys may be more likely to be playing games, but those boys, they're probably not as interested in the microbiome as you and I are, and they're probably way more interested in their screen time. So just a point of reference for moms, to educate the parents about the role that the screens might be playing in altering their microbiome. So questions that you can ask, and for each one of these studies, I'm going to give you just a few questions to kind of think about asking if you want to jot them down. So certainly mode of birth would be a question that you should always ask. And also antibiotic use is important. How much antibiotic use was there as a child? And then what was the childhood diet and activity level like? In other words, were they outside playing a lot or were they more indoors? And then how much time spent on a screen? So those would be some questions you could ask that could kind of flush this out for your adolescent patients. Okay, second study. I got to speed it up here. We're going to run out of time. I'll be talking about this for days. Second study was on the fetal microbiome and maternal transfer. Now, in my microbiome presentation, the seminar binder, I have lots of data. It's also in Clinical Academy as well in the microbiome lesson about the fact that they always thought that the microbiome of a baby in utero was sterile. But they now know that it is not sterile, and there are multiple ways that microbiome is developed. So here we are with a study, and they're like, wow, hey, what do you know? The baby's gut programming begins in utero from mom. Well, yeah, sure enough, we already kind of knew that. Come to find out that there are metabolites in the mother's body that absolutely reach all the way in through the baby, through that placenta, and it's not gated that way, that those microbes are able to go in and begin to colonize that little one before baby is even born. And we know that through the birth canal, that's where that good, really maximized exposure happens. But there's also that risk when there's C-section that they don't get that nice lactobacillus dosing through that vaginal canal. They get it more that the proteobacteria, the skin bacteria, external bacteria when they're delivered C-section. And that's what disrupts that gut microbiome for those C-section babies. So they did find that there was the same kind of microbes and metabolites in the baby as there were in the mother. And the researchers said that microbiome-associated metabolites in the fetus come from the mother and that they're already hard at work before birth, helping the gut be nice and strong for the development of the immune system after the baby is born. So yeah, big surprise, but at least they're looking at it. And I was happy about that. I think your advice to a mom is obviously going to be to eat really, really well during pregnancy. High fiber foods are going to be important. Fermented foods are going to be important. Probiotic rich foods, even if you give mom a probiotic, probiotics are very transitory. They don't stimulate. I should do a podcast on this. It's one of the things that makes me crazy. This might be a soapbox. I know I probably wouldn't make it a hill I would die on, but I think it is probably a soapbox, is that probiotics are transitory in the gut. We take them and they develop and enhance and strengthen the existing microbiome, but they don't stay there. They don't live there. So I'm not saying probiotics are bad. They do a job, but they don't do what we often think they do. So anyway, use food for mom, not a crappy prenatal vitamin when she's pregnant. And then questions to ask, if you're working with women that may be in that preconception phase, ask them, are you thinking about getting pregnant in the next 6 to 12 months? And if so, start working on their microbiome. And then ask them, of course, if they're using any kind of antibiotics or anything like that. Even PPIs can dramatically impact the microbiome. And not surprisingly, I guess, the artificial sweeteners can too, like stevia, those kinds of things. They can negatively impact the microbiome. So there you go. All right, number 3. There was a study on menopause and the microbiome, so I was especially interested in this one. And they found out, sure enough, that the woman, when she goes into menopause, that her microbiome shifts. So remember when I said about the young babies, or the young adolescents, I should say, that were in that transitional period, right? That estradiol is starting to go up. What they found is that when a woman goes into menopause, as the estradiol drops, the microbiota actually changes. And so this can contribute to menopausal-related symptoms. So this study was about using probiotics and prebiotics to help women manage the symptoms of menopause. So I thought this one was very interesting. I'm always thinking about the gut, but I don't think I would have thought about a menopausal woman and her symptoms like hot flashes or whatever that may have been associated with, oh, that's a microbiome problem. I don't think I would have thought that. So this is great. It was a great paper. I thought it was well written. They talked about therapeutically modulating what they call the gut estrobolome, which means basically the microbes that are responsible for conjugating and dealing with estrogens. So pre and prebiotics like lactobacillus have been shown to increase bacterial diversity in the gut. You can use those with any menopausal woman. And they said that the probiotics based on this study could really help with hot flashes, reducing anxiety, and also improve metabolic conditions and deal with excess or unwanted weight gain. So we know that those hormonal shifts affect that gut mycology, or ecology, what's happening in the gut. So, consider that with your menopausal patients. So it might be a good one. Lactobacillus is always a good one to give. Also, you can make sure for fiber foods. I'm never going to stop talking about that. Good vegetables, fruits, things with all of those good phytochemicals. So you could ask, if her digestion has changed since she went into menopause, maybe. You could ask about like constipation, gut health regularity. And then also just ask her if she's using a pre or probiotic. You may want to recommend one and just see where you get. What if it reduced her unpleasant or unwanted symptoms by 20, 30%? Might be super worth it. The next study, I'm a little meh on, but I wanted to share it with you anyway. It was about green coffee extract and metabolic conditions. Specifically, the study was about obesity. And they said that the gut microbiome, which we know contributes to obesity and metabolic issues. We know this already. But they used oxidized green tea extract, and they used an unmodified coffee extract to see if it could impact the gut microbiota as it had to do with modulating or managing obesity or excess weight. This was a mice study, not a human study. And what they found was when they supplemented with the green coffee extract, they found that the microbiome significantly shifted. Adipose tissue was reduced, lipid panel improved, and insulin sensitivity also improved in the mice that they were used in this study. So they found that the green caffeine extract, the green coffee, that extract increased the growth of beneficial bacteria significantly. Like there was a significant change. But here's the thing, that the green coffee extract is just high in polyphenols. And polyphenols are those compounds that affect metabolism. They are really effective in metabolic resistance, like insulin resistance, metabolic conditions, other more significant ones. So it kind of comes back to a really good diet. So you could use green coffee extract if you want to. That's why I was kind of iffy about it. But I think you could very easily just change their diet. And we don't have to use an extract. We could just change the diet and they'll get better. We know that if we improve the diet, improve the short chain fatty acid production, reduce the inflammation in the diet, get the crappy food out, get the wheat out, get the dairy out if they're sensitive, they lose weight, they feel better, and metabolic conditions resolve. So, I was sort of iffy on this one, but I thought I'd give it to you anyway. All right, study number 5. This was about polysaccharides as regulators of the gut. Basically, the importance of plant fibers. That's all. So I have a resource for you that you'll find linked in the show notes. And I actually updated the high fiber food list to give you soluble and insoluble fiber. And this was kind of the point of this study. They just talked about the difference between soluble and insoluble fiber and why they are so important. Well, as a quick recap, those are the 2 primary types of fiber, and then there are subcategories within each one of those. But the soluble fiber bacteria can act on them. They're somewhat digestible. The insoluble fiber goes right on through, right? It adds bulk to the stool. It's also great for the microbiome. So all fibers are not created equal, meaning some are insoluble, some are soluble. Some foods have more of one type than another. So I think it's important that we rotate fibers. Now, certainly dietary fiber is going to be our key. That's the most important way to get fiber. Women need average of 25 grams of fiber a day. Men need 30. So we could just shoot for 30 and call it good. But it's tough to get that much fiber. Like 1 cup of black beans has 15 grams of fiber. Yay. But I'm not going to eat a cup of black beans every day. I buy them and I never eat the whole can. I get about halfway through it. You have to be very intentional about getting fiber in the diet when we're thinking about, achieving that 30-gram mark. So what I would say to this is don't put someone on a fiber supplement and then leave them on that fiber supplement. They have to be having a varied diet with different types of fiber in the diet. That's going to make the biggest difference. So there's like inulin, that's a fiber, and pectin is a good fiber, and beans and leeks and pears and raspberries. There are nuts that have good sources of fiber. And also then there's soluble starches and resistant starches. You could go way deep into this. I don't think we need to micromanage like that, but I do think being aware that of their fiber intake, and this is why a diet log can be so effective, because when you see how much fiber they're getting in their diet, it really does make a difference. It can start losing weight dramatically. The increased fiber keeps them regular. It also keeps the bowel healthy. It feeds the microbiome. We start getting more short-chain fatty acids, which means less inflammation. It helps to seal up leaky gut, all the things good about fiber. Just by looking at their food log, we're going to be able to tell. So a few questions you could ask them is, are you taking a fiber supplement? How long have you taken it if they are? And then ask them if they've tried different prebiotic fibers. One of my favorites is slippery elm. I love slippery elm because it's very rare that someone's going to react to it. Sometimes inulin can cause a little bit of bloating, especially if there's dysbiosis in the gut. You guys know what to do with that. I don't need to keep talking about it. Okay. This one is the spicy one. This one made me so crazy. Okay, you ready? I'm going to kind of read some things to you because I don't want to get it wrong. I hope that maybe I just read the study wrong, but I don't think I did. This is the one from Ohio. Here's what they said. Long-term antibiotic use wiped out butyrate-producing microbes. Okay, fine. I got that. Antibiotics mess up the gut. I get that. And so they talk about antibiotics and the disruption in the gut. But here's what made me cranky. They said that fermented dairy products, like in their paper, they said cheeses and yogurts, were once reservoirs, a major reservoir of what they call ARGs. And ARGs are antibiotic-resistant genes and antibiotic-resistant bacteria. And I kind of had to stop and do a double take. What you're telling me is that fermented dairy products create antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Well, okay, I kind of just set that aside because I couldn't quite wrap my mind around that because I'm thinking fermented dairy. We've been fermenting dairy like forever, buttermilk and kefir and kefir. For a long time, how is it that this is maybe the antibiotic resistance is a good thing? In the paper, it was a bad thing. They were saying it's bad. They said fermented foods, I'm reading this is from the NIH. You're going to get mad. We'll just wait. Fermented foods, particularly fermented dairy products, offer significant health benefits. I'm like, yay! But they also present serious concerns. Now the tone changes. Probiotic bacteria such as lactic acid bacteria found in these foods has been strongly linked to the selection and dissemination of antibiotic-resistant genes. So they're basically saying that fermented dairy is bad. But they said, well, we've had major improvements in the fermentation process over the last 15 years, resulting in an improved mainstream fermented dairy product selection. However, they got to throw the rest of us under the bus. It says many traditional fermented foods, which rely on natural fermentation, continue to harbor antibiotic-resistant genes and antibiotic-resistant bacteria. What? And they go on to say this poses significant public health risks. They are after our fermented foods. It said, consumption of antibiotic-resistant, rich fermented food led to an increase in the consumer's gut resistance or antibiotic resistance gene pool. I could not believe it. And at the very end of the study, they said, it's like they're saying fermentation is good, but they only want fermentation their way. Here's what they said. Innovative fermentation approach, it's called Hellenization, involves, get this, chemical sanitation and starter culture application that effectively reduce the mentioned food safety risks in fermented vegetables with potential in industrial application. AKA, they want to control, sanitize, create these crappy starter cultures so they can make sure that fermented foods are safe. I couldn't even believe it. I was just like, I don't even understand. So this is a study, I'm pitching it. I'm a no on this one. Now, certainly you could ferment foods and, if you don't do it right, well, of course, there's always going to be bad, funky things that happen. But when you ferment them and you know what you're doing and you follow the recipe and you can see that it's a live culture and there's good bacteria in there, it's wonderful. Raw milk fermented is wonderful. All the bacteria, all the enzymes, all the nutrients, the calcium is more available. There's so much good stuff. So I hope whoever is out there is not listening to this podcast because they're going to come lock me up. But I am all pro on that, all 100%. And I'm sure all of you all too. So, I don't even know what to tell you to ask a patient. Like, have you been eating real, true fermented foods, not Bubby's sauerkraut that's in a glass jar? Because it has no living bacteria in a glass jar. You need something that's like living and alive and when you take the lid off, you can hear it. It's popping. It's fizzes. It's something's going and growing in there. So anyway, moving on. It makes me have a hot flash. Okay, 2 more. Periodontitis and gut dysbiosis. Periodontitis, inflammation of the in the mouth of the gums. So not surprisingly, they said they're researching this and they found that periodontal treatments they seem to maybe fix the mouth, but what they didn't do was get to the underlying cause. And what this particular study said is that changes in the gut microbiome affected the oral microbiome and the periodontitis, which was really not surprising, but I was really happy that they were looking at it. They said while periodontal therapy improved the salivary microbiota, it did not affect the gut microbiota, but they saw a disturbed gut microbiota with periodontal disease. So the conclusion was gut dysbiosis of patients with periodontitis may impact their metabolic profile and the oral health. So I thought that was pretty great. They said the periodontal therapy doesn't work on its own, that we need to explore more about the role of gut microbiome and oral health. So there we go. They're coming to the party a little late, but that's okay. We're happy that they're coming to the party. That's all we care. So, you could think about like improving oral health. That Cellcore has a toothpaste that has biocidin in it, or maybe it's biocidin has the toothpaste. Anyway, it's a great toothpaste, so it can help with oral health and making sure that the mouth is free from any kind of harmful microorganisms. So flossing is obviously important. You could ask about that. You could ask about if they've had bleeding gums, maybe bad breath, or if they've been diagnosed with periodontal disease. That's going to tell you whether you may have a gut problem. This is also a great networking opportunity. If you do see patients and you start asking these kinds of questions, I would find a local dentist that you can refer to. Go, do some networking with that dentist and say, hey, listen, I have some patients I'd really love to refer to you. Might I do that? I'd like to know what types of patients you'd like me to send. And I've got a podcast coming up very soon that's going to talk more about referrals. So stay tuned for that because that one's coming up. And then last one is about pediatric hypertension. And this one really caught my eye. It was in the BMC Microbiology Journal, and they said children with hypertension had lower gut diversity and microbial imbalance. So now they are looking at gut health in children being related to cardiometabolic issues and hypertension. So I thought that was really interesting. I don't know that I've ever met a child that's hypertensive. I don't think I've had anyone in my practice like that, but it was very fascinating that this was a study that came out. So now it kind of makes me, I ask the question or thinking about the question a little bit differently. What do I have any kids, and has anyone checked their blood pressure? I don't know why you would in a child. There must be something else going on, because typically children that go to the pediatrician's office, they don't take their pediatrician's office. They're not taking blood pressure. So anyway, that was kind of interesting to me that the gut microbiome was influencing that with these kids. So you could ask, if how's the child, like, is there anxiety? Ask about their lunch, school lunches, that kind of thing. And how many fruits and veggies do kids eat? A lot of times kids are so picky now because their gut is so screwed up. They've got so much inflammation in the gut-brain axis. The vagus nerve isn't working. They have texture, sensory issues, and that prevents them from eating really good food. So, there's a lot to consider when you're dealing and working with children. So those are my 8 studies. I hope you found them interesting. The fermented fiber one just lit me on fire. I was so mad about that. I mean, I wasn't really mad, but, I got all fired up about it. Anyway, all right, here's your recap. You ready? Ask more questions. Like, think about when you're working with patients, just ask more questions about the gut microbiome. Don't be afraid to kind of dig in on that food and fiber and, for kids, screen time. Think about hormones, whether a woman is in her reproductive years or a menopausal woman or, before she started her period, an adolescent age. And then let's just think about different ways we can get fiber in the diet. And remember, too, that I've got a resource for you. It's a high fiber foods resource. I've had the same resource, and probably a lot of you have it. I've had it for a long time, but we just kind of revised it, gave it a little facelift, put in a few new foods. So check that out. You can download it. You can just go to the show notes and get it and download it. We've made it so that it's a resource that you can just use in your practice, free, like have it, use it. But you can put your name on it if you want to. You can use it however you want. Don't care. But it's got soluble and insoluble fiber, and it's broken into kind of categories. So I think it'll be helpful for you. It's great to give to the patients because then they can see how many grams of fiber are in the different foods, and they can choose the foods that they like and then kind of add it up and get an idea. I think people will say, oh, yeah, I get plenty of fiber. I eat a salad every day. Well, did you know that a salad probably has no more than 5 grams of fiber? Hello, we need 25 to 30 for women. So yeah, salad's just not cutting it. But the general public thinks that that's what that's what's great. I've got plenty of fiber. I eat a salad every day. Not enough. So think about the gut microbiome a little bit more, and then find your local dentist. You might even find like midwives or doulas if you want to work with pregnancy-related patients. And then pre and probiotics are also really good. Remember, they're transitory. I promise you, I will do a podcast about this because this is one thing that I don't think enough people understand. And I go over it in Clinical Academy. It's in the microbiome lesson. And I have a whole seminar binder about the microbiome. But, I was teaching this stuff like 8 years ago. So some of this, I think, geez, you guys are just coming to the party. But at least the research has come a long way, which is really, really great. And I'm very, very thankful for that. So that was kind of a lot. It was a big old gold mine of information. So pick and choose what was good for you, not good for you. We talked about like bugs and baby bugs and menopausal and hypertension and all sorts of stuff. But the good news is that the more that we know, the better we are able to treat these patients. So If you are looking for more clinical education, I would love to have you in Clinical Academy. You hear me talk about Clinical Business Academy all the time. That's like business coaching program that's specifically about growing your business. But the other side of what we need is really the clinical knowledge and confidence to feel like we can make the right recommendations for the patients. And sometimes we need to make those recommendations on the fly. So if you are a practitioner and you're like, just dipping your toe in the functional medicine space, or you're not sure if you have the right kind of protocol, like how do I deal with this? If it's a complex case, where do I start? That kind of thing. Clinical Academy is going to be your BFF. I tell you, it's got supplements in there. I review supplements. It's called the Product Vault. I think it's everybody's favorite. The feedback that I get, everybody loves a Product Vault. And it's just me talking for about 3 to 5 minutes about a supplement. How to use it, what it's for, what's in it, the dosage, contraindications, all the things. And then we've got tons of protocols. There are video lessons and resources, really everything that you need to be able to be a master at a certain topic. There's, all kinds of things in there, sleep and hormones and male health and thyroid and microbiome and cardiovascular. And oh my gosh, you just can't even. It's a whole bunch. So go on over there, check it out. It's $99 a month. For now, we're talking about possibly increasing the price. So you want to get in before that happens, but it's $99. If you don't like it, no harm, no foul, bounce out. No big, long contracts or anything like that. But I've been doing this since 2019, and it's all of my clinical information all rolled up into one place. It's kind of like having all the seminars you ever went to in one place. So all you have to do is go to rondanelson.com/clinical academy. And you can jump right on in. But in the meantime, head to the show notes, get the links for these studies. If you're interested, you can pick and choose which ones you want to look at. And then that fiber resource will be there as well. All right, my friends, take care. Have an amazing week. And I'll be back next week with more on the Clinical Entrepreneur Podcast.